Well, welcome to the program from the Resurgent on Twitter at Gabby_Hoffman. Gabby Hoffman is with us. Gabby, how are you today?
Cam, good to be on. It's been a while. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, and thank you for gracing us with your presence. I know that you said on Twitter that you haven't been doing a lot of media lately, so I appreciate you you coming out of your media hibernation and joining us here on Cam and Company.
Absolutely. You know, I've been busy running my media consulting business, so it's a good thing. So I don't want to detract from that. So I'm happy to join on, especially about this important topic too.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we talked about this on last week's Cam and Company. I had every intention, honestly, Sunday night of watching this, and then we had friends over, and I just forgot. So I'm really glad that you watched Trophy on CNN on Sunday night. We had talked about, the preview piece that CNN revealed on Friday, and it seemed like there was some balance. There was, quotes from big game hunters, quotes from anti-hunting activists, and it seemed like the producers tried to get both sides. Did you find that actually extended to the entire documentary, or was the thumb on the scales for the anti-hunting activists, Gabby?
I think upon initial review, and when you see the commercials, as you said in your leading segment before this, that they wanted, most people see it upon the surface and they think it's an anti-hunting documentary, but upon watching the film and as it progresses, you see that the documentarians probably discovered upon their research and their one-on-one interviews with the individual breeders, the big game hunters, the wildlife officers included in the film, I think they had to show a different view, and their conclusions were very different from the premise that they were trying to establish, probably to paint all hunters, especially trophy hunters, in a negative light. But you see throughout the film, and as it progresses and reaches its conclusion, that they actually indirectly and perhaps inconsequently made a very good case for conservation methods, mostly through hunting as conservation, in Africa specifically, because it's very different compared to American hunting, and that distinction does need to be made because some people want to lump in general hunting with trophy hunting, and they certainly captivated how the programs operate in Africa, especially given how unique it is there.
Okay, so, and really, I mean, as you say, in Africa, some of the really big success stories in terms of bringing species back from the brink have been because of hunters. And we've actually seen that, too, here in North America. The reintroduction of elk in places like Kentucky and now even southwestern Virginia, thanks to groups like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Hunting is conservation. But as you say, there's this emotional side of it, right, where the animal lovers, they don't want hunting to work. They don't want hunting to be a part of conservation, because how on earth can killing an animal save a species, Gabby?
Yeah, if you were looking at Born Free Foundation's tweets while they were simultaneously watching the documentary, they were saying, well, the best alternative is ecotourism, and that's going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars, if not a few billions of dollars, for supporting wildlife. And actually, a lot of people say, and it's been reported in National Geographic, there's a great piece from November that I'll elaborate more on a little bit later, they even determined that ecotourism can sometimes trample on the ecosystem there and actually harm wildlife even more, with so many people visiting the area. So they want to, a lot of especially the experts featured in the film, want to showcase, well, hunting is killing, it's so atrocious, and even these beautiful exotic species, if they're threatened and endangered, how is killing going to save them? Because they're so reactionary and they're programmed to think one way. They're set in their ways, and they can't see that sometimes taking a little bit of a species away could eventually save it as a whole and lead to greater amounts of those species in the long run. And we certainly see that here in the United States with elk, turkeys, mule deer, and various other species. And it's hard for people to reconcile that notion with exotic species such as the big five in Africa. And there specifically, it is shown to help boost those populations.
Absolutely. And one of the specifics that Trophy talked about was the black rhino hunts, right? And for the past couple of years, Dallas Safari Club and I think the government of Namibia have worked together to auction off a tag for one specific black rhino, right? It's not like, okay, you got a tag and now you can go hunt any black rhino you want.
Exactly.
The Namibian government identifies these creatures who have lived long lives. They are now past the breeding age and may, in fact, be causing harm to the number of rhinos. There was one bull that was taken by I think an 82-year-old who I think won this auction. $275,000 he paid. This was a bull that wasn't reproducing anymore, but it was killing. It had killed 3 juvenile rhinos, and it had killed 2 females of breeding age. So here you have one rhino that's killed 5. You didn't have any hunters involved in that, right? That was one rhino who killed 5. That killed 5 rhinos. It was the hunter who paid for that opportunity to take that black rhino, and that money used to benefit the anti-poaching efforts. And by the way, a problem rhino was no longer a problem. Now you had better chances for survival for the remaining black rhinos there in Namibia.
Yeah, culling the herd was very much highlighted in the documentary. There was the segment with the South African rhino breeder, and he talked about why he wanted to petition his government to deregulate the sale of rhino horns, because the proceeds from those sales can go towards restoration and conservation efforts of that species, of which I believe he has over 1,500 in his possession. And they also highlighted the safari owner, Christophe Gomez, and he breeds and he also entertains and hosts Americans primarily at his private safari, and he breeds these animals and he gets attached, and it kind of humanizes them a bit more too. And throughout the documentary, they weren't just showing that they're greedy guys who are simply ruled by bloodlust. They don't simply fuel their efforts by hate. They love the species that they're breeding or bringing in exclusive hunters to come pursue, with respect to the safari hunter. But they combine both the culling of the herd in the case of the South African safari hunter, and also very much with the big game hunter from Texas that they bring. He harvests an elephant and a lion, and they're much older. He was trying to show that they help cull the herd, especially from problem elephants and lions. And throughout the documentary, they showed that these individuals who hunt or breed or harvest these certain animals to help bolster their populations are not doing it out of spite. They're simply doing it to bolster conservation efforts. And for most Americans, that seems very bizarre. And I mean, for me personally, as I wrote in the article, I don't think I could ever harvest a big 5 animal. Now that I've started to go hunting, I've harvested a lot of upland bird and waterfowl recently. But it makes sense in the scheme of things in Africa for people to help bolster local economies through culling the herd, especially with dangerous animals like lions and elephants, which were shown in the documentary to cause disturbances in Zimbabwe and also South Africa as well.
So what were the, because honestly, a lot of the quotes that I saw from the anti-hunting activists before this film aired seemed really long on emotion and really short on facts. I saw, for instance, that Dave Salmoni talked with Don Lemon a few days ago on CNN, I think in the preview, in the build-up to this film airing. And Salmoni, a guy who's a staunch opponent of hunting. He's got his own TV shows. He's got his, sort of wildlife shows. 5 years ago, he had tweeted out, "Trophy hunters suck ass and need me to punch them right in their own face." Which, again, Gabby, that's not really a data-driven argument, right? That's just, I hate trophy hunters. Where was the data, and what did the data show that these anti-hunting activists were presenting? Or did they have any?
They weren't really presenting data. Actually, the documentarians were showing the differences between legalized controlled hunts of elephants, for example. So they showcased a figure, and I believe the Safari Club highlights this as well, or maybe the Fish and Wildlife Service as well. But I believe it was Safari Club that has the numbers that, but they were using this, I believe, from National Geographic, that 1,000 or so elephants are harvested each year legally through controlled, very measured hunts. And these are very expensive hunts, as we know. They could range $50,000 and above. And they showed, alternatively, what poaching does in terms of its impact on local African countries. They harvest about 30,000 elephants illegally each year. So even Yashar Ali, who we know from New York Magazine and Huffington Post, who loves elephants, I mean, who doesn't love elephants? We all do. But even him being a staunch anti-hunter, I included in my article that he tweeted that it's important to note the distinction between poachers and hunters, and he said a lot of the blame is sadly shifted on hunters when it should be on poachers who incur more harm than good.
And that's listen, that I think is a huge conversation that frankly a lot of non-hunters, they probably don't really get that. They don't, what's the difference between a poacher and a hunter, right? I mean, a poacher is just somebody who's hunting, but he's doing it without all the proper paperwork. And in Africa, again, this is the difference, honestly, between these populations living and dying, right? Because the poachers, they're not thinking beyond that specific animal. If I can get that animal and I can get the resources of that animal, then I can feed my family, I can, put food on the table or maybe clothes on my kids. When you start to see these creatures as a renewable resource, right? And you could take these creatures whenever you find them, or again, you could start to manage your resources so that there's always going to be a creature there for either you to take or for a hunter to take. That all of a sudden shifts the value of these animals. And ultimately, at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not you're an animal lover or not, if you care about the future of these animals, you have to be a little hard-headed. You have to be a little rational about this. And you can't just use your emotions here, right? So, it may be cold-hearted to think, all right, we've got to make sure that these animals have more value as a renewable resource than as an exploitable resource, because you're still thinking about these cute, cuddly animals as resources.
Yes.
But that's why, that's why we're adults and that's why we're humans, because we can think about these things in a way that that animals can't, Gabby. We have to be good stewards of the environment because, rhinos aren't good stewards of the environment. Elephants aren't good stewards of the environment. It's up to us as humans to be those good stewards.
Absolutely, and that's why certain segments of the government now, especially with the Department of Interior, has made segues to advance hunting as a conservation method. I believe previously, before Secretary Zinke came to office, that norm was not enshrined in their work, and it's encouraging to see hunting being more accepted and more palatable as a means of conservation. And I was reading in National Geographic with respect to the rhino hunt, and a lot of the people locally, and especially those who partake in safaris and arrange these controlled hunts, do not like these so-called Western environmentalists coming in and imposing their neo-colonialism onto these local populations who are not as affluent as those of us here in the United States who don't have the luxury of knowing whether or not they're going to have their livelihoods threatened by lions or rhinoceroses or other top or big game animals. So people think in terms of the lens of here in America. They don't understand the threats that are placed on locals in Africa. And people, and as we know, people go hunting for bear, cougar, and other predators here in the United States because they pose a greater threat. So depending upon what continent you're in, we face similar challenges with some of these predators, as I mentioned. And then obviously in Africa, they deal slightly differently. And there's that same outrage placed on both because people don't understand kind of that survive or don't survive principle, especially when their lives are endangered. They don't know what it's like to be a farmer, whether it's in the mountainous United States or in the Sahara, or in the plains of Africa, I should say. So they don't put themselves in these local shoes, whether here in the United States or even those deep in Africa. And they are just conditioned by Walt Disney to think that lions are gentle creatures or that leopards are saints or things of that sort. But obviously, not many people, we should be very prudent about this. Not everyone is going to be cultivating or hunting these big 5 species. Very few in the population, very few hunters actually do get to do that. So it's a smaller segment of hunters, but it's also still a very important thing in terms of promoting conservation. So it's important to understand the nuances, and I think the documentary did that better than what most would believe.
All right, well, that's good to hear. Gabby, listen, thank you so much for coming on the program. Don't be a stranger. We'll do this again very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.